2023 was the year of girl dinner, grimace milkshakes, and mammoth meatballs. A great year if you stick to food and ignore most of what's happening in the real world. But 2024 is a year primed for big breakthroughs and growth when it comes to our food supply. And the 5 trends I'm about to cover will revolutionize what we eat, how we eat it, and totally revamp the meat industry as we know it. Let's explore these 5 trends that have been brewing at the intersection of food and science. Starting from the bottom, we have CRISPR-enhanced food. Now, when you hear the term CRISPR, your first thought probably isn't about food. It's likely pharmaceuticals, health, or disease. But if CRISPR can be used to edit human DNA to cure genetic diseases, it can also be used to alter the genetic code of the foods we eat. And you might even be surprised that there's already a CRISPR-enhanced food on the market. This is true. The Conscious Food Company released the first ever CRISPR-edited food, a salad mix called Conscious Greens, last year in 2023. And if you want to learn more details about this, you have to check out my other video on how CRISPR will revolutionize the food supply. You can find the link in the description. But the salad mix, the Conscious Greens, these were edited to have the nutrition of dark leafy greens, that high nutrition, while having this crunchy, munchy texture of iceberg lettuce. But I think it's only time until more food companies follow. In fact, the Conscious Food Company has already announced their next endeavor, which is making seedless fruits like blackberries, black raspberries, and red raspberries. And this could obviously be extended to pitted fruits like apricots, plums, and peaches. And in my other video that focuses only on CRISPR-enhanced foods, I take into a bunch of different research areas like making cows climate-proof, increasing the protein content in food, more flavor, better flavors, higher spiciness. I mean, the opportunities are really endless here, and we're just at the beginning. We need to talk about trend number 4, which is precision fermentation. Precision fermentation is this technology where we use microorganisms as these little factories to produce a specific molecule. It could be an animal protein, an enzyme, a flavor, any molecule that you choose. This is a way to get around all the problems with animal breeding, rearing, and slaughter, because it's a way that we can make animal identical products without the animal, right? We'll use those microorganisms. To do precision fermentation successfully, what you need to do is you take the genetic code from the animal, how the animal produces a specific protein, let's say. We take that code and we give it to the microorganism. So now the microorganism knows how to make the exact same animal protein. We then just grow these microbes in fermentation tanks so that they produce high amounts of this specific protein. Then we simply have to filter or separate out the protein from the microorganisms, and we have a food-safe ingredient. And the same technology has been used to safely and effectively produce insulin and food enzymes for the past several decades. A good example of a food made using precision fermentation is back in 2020, Perfect Day launched their animal-free whey protein. So whey protein made without the cow. But since 2020, there hasn't been more launches. But that's not because work wasn't happening. In fact, there's hundreds of startups and companies looking to use precision fermentation to make food ingredients. So what I'm expecting to see in 2024 is all this research come to fruition. I'm talking about animal-free cheese, animal-free eggs. I'm involved in a research project using yeast to make milk proteins. So this year, I would be on the lookout for more animal-free products, but not because they're plant-based. These would be animal-free products, but identical to the product made using an animal. Number 3 is a trend I've been watching for a while, and that's because I'm a huge coffee lover, or as my boyfriend likes to say, I'm addicted to coffee, which I understand is the truth, but you just don't have to say it that way. Now, it might be hard to imagine your ritual of having a morning coffee without the coffee bean, but that's exactly what Atomo is trying to do. This company has deconstructed coffee down to the molecular level to understand the specific molecules that are responsible for its flavor and aroma, and then obtain these key elements from other natural sources. Essentially, they're able to sidestep using a coffee bean to make coffee. Last year, Atomo did launch their first beanless coffee, but on an incredibly limited scale. If you want to try it, you better book a trip to New York City and visit Gumption Coffee, which I have not. In 2024, I'm very hopeful that the average person like me will be able to try their first cup of beanless coffee. Moving on to trend number 2, I want to dive into the world of 3D printing and personalized nutrition. In the past, 3D printing has been relegated to super niche applications like expensive pasta or chocolate. Yet the research into this technology has never slowed. In fact, the university I worked at in the Netherlands had several PhD students and their advisors working on 3D printing foods. And previously, I know this technology was not that great. Sometimes the foods it printed did not even look that appealing, but it has progressed and come quite far. Now, the greatest asset of this very precise manufacturing technique is its ability to tailor foods based on individual nutritional needs, lifestyle, or even real-time physiological data. Imagine food printers in a military environment where soldiers will be able to enhance their performance by printing their own food based on their unique physiological markers. Or 3D printers could be used in space at the International Space Station to nourish astronauts, which have very unique metabolic needs while they're out in space. Hey, I'm hopeful 3D printers will soon be in grocery stores so that you and me can customize our own food as we're shopping. I mean, this might sound crazy, but it could be very similar to a vending machine or those fancy soda dispensers where you pick like, I want Coca-Cola, but with vanilla and cherry flavoring. Except with a 3D printer, you could customize things like what protein content? Do you want high fiber? What vitamins and minerals, right? You choose your own food product and then it's printed right then and there. And you've made it to trend number 1, which is cultivated meat and seafood. You could also see this be called cultured meat, so same thing. But both these terms mean that animal cells are sort of grown and proliferate in these large bioreactors and then are arranged into different muscle-like structures so that they mimic something like a cut of beef or ground meat, some animal tissue that we typically eat. This technique would eliminate the need for us to raise, farm, and slaughter thousands of animals every year for us to eat as meat. And what's different than plant-based meats, if you've ever eaten a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger, is that cultured meat is real, genuine meat. It is animal cells, but it's grown in a bioreactor instead of slaughtering an animal. Although it may seem very futuristic, it's been over 10 years since researcher Mark Post debuted the first cultivated meat burger back in 2013. So this research area has had a decade, a little more than a decade, to mature where it's now scalable, where the food could be produced at a large scale, which means it's more cost effective and more consumers could afford it. In fact, there's now over 150 different companies on 6 different continents that are working on making cultured meat a reality. But why do I think 2024 is going to be the year of cultivated meat? Well, I think the stars have aligned for this industry for a couple reasons. First, both the US and Singapore now have a regulatory framework in place where this type of product could be approved and reach consumers. Secondly, 2 pioneers of the industry, Upside Foods and Good Meat, have achieved USDA and FDA clearance, which is a significant milestone if this is to become commercialized. Now, this technology is definitely controversial And for every person that I meet that is very excited about it, there is one other person who is extremely opposed to it. Those who advocate for the technology boast about greater animal welfare and a lower environmental impact of the meat industry. One study even estimates that if cultivated meat were to be produced using renewable energy, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 92%, and it would require 90% less land use, with other benefits like a lowered risk of foodborne disease and less antibiotic use. Not to mention that many of the leaders in this industry in the past year or so have started to transition to larger manufacturing facilities, which would make producing this cultivated meat much more cost-effective. The opposing side will point out that these are just quite rosy estimates that we have no guarantee of achieving, or that our food simply should not be grown in a bioreactor or in a lab. Either way, I think that 2024 will be a year that many of us, if you want to, might be able to try our first cultivated meat. Well, that's a wrap. That's my top 5 trends to be on the lookout for in 2024. If you enjoyed how I showed technology impacts the food industry, next you should check out my video on saving the Cavendish banana, because that also talks about how we're using breakthrough technology to make sure bananas don't go extinct.